So I don't know if anybody has a question. I think Mathieu had one. I can see a couple. If you allow me, I'll start with mine, and then we'll go to the room. One thing that I'm sure everybody in the room is interested in, yes, please go ahead, is finding out what the role of businesses is in your respective countries with regards to a constructive role, not just sort of the classic lobbying, but what we call it the shift, smart pro-climate lobbying, constructive lobbying to save the climate. What is the role of businesses in your respective countries? Is it on?
Hello? Yeah. Strangely enough, in many cases, businesses have actually been ahead of government in the UK. We've seen, I probably shouldn't say this because I believe it's a Swedish company, IKEA or IKEA. There we go, you've got pronunciation. Has committed to 100% renewable energy. We've seen lots of companies saying, basically, they know where they know the direction of travel, they know it's low carbon, and that's where they'd like to get, and they're committing to that in their own production. Of course, there are laggards, that's certainly the case, although it tends to be the case, in our experience, that the laggards don't particularly talk themselves, but that trade associations become the mouthpieces for the laggards certainly in the climate debate in the UK. So broadly speaking, I'd say that actually businesses have been quite helpful, and Green Alliance has the privilege of working with some of the more progressive businesses that are interested in promoting, well, I mean, if I can be very blunt and very Anglo-Saxon about it, ways of making money in a low-carbon world.
Sure, and we see nothing wrong with that if it goes in the right direction. Do you work with the CBI for that? Does the CBI have an active role?
A very active role. I mean, the CBI has been for, the last 5 or 6 years, very proactive on energy and climate change issues in the UK. They've been supportive of carbon budgets, obviously concerned about keeping the costs manageable for businesses, but I think they saw very clearly, again, 5, 6, perhaps longer years ago, that the UK is going to decarbonise. We hope the rest of the world is also going to decarbonise. And there are lots of huge business opportunities there. Some of the work that we've done shows that over the last 5 years, the green economy, so anyone working in low carbon, renewable, broadly, including recycling and water purification and all that sort of stuff, that economy has grown at about 5% per year throughout the recession, whereas the British economy wasn't doing so well for a little while. So that's been a source of jobs growth and sort of classic economic growth, as well as green growth.
Thank you. Catharina?
Yeah, of course, business is extremely important. I mean, business is at the heart of this whole development. Without an economic demand for new, better regulations, clearer regulations, I think specifically clearer regulations, this will not happen. Politicians listen to businesses, and that is how it is. In our think tank, we engaged a discussion with parts of the Swedish power-intensive industry, because they were extremely worried about the efforts to increase transmission lines between the Nordic continent and Central Europe, because that would mean importing higher prices from the continent. That was a real problem like 2 years ago. And successfully, I think we managed or they could see that transmission line also were sort of equalizing power price levels, and thereby reducing risks and promoting or enabling investments. And we hear almost none of those arguments today. They are interested in security of supply and stable prices, and that's it.
Great, thank you. Now we can switch to the audience if anybody has a question. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I had some questions about, again, Henry Rees, after your presentation. I'm certainly not the German violent anti-nuclear, but, and I like a market approach, but don't you compare apple and pears? Because as far as I know, you cannot really insure nuclear. There is still the question of the nuclear waste and the cost of all that. I mean, you know that discussion. And I think that is not addressed. And I mean, Sellafield and the reports which you read about this is rather worrying. So this apple and pear question. And another question is from this side of the water, on the continent. But you know this, of course, much better. I was in a way a bit disappointed of this last coalition, if you may say, especially the Lib Dems. Well, there was this, I think Chris Yoon had this little traffic problem, and then Ed Davey. I think they were really starting off good, and I don't know if so much came out of it. And sort of a sectorial question that, for example, you have this, I think it's Kevin Sarah with T-Nur, this solar energy from Tunisia. I think the government had some projects that would be a valid source of energy, and I think that also didn't go very far, up to now.
Sorry, so is there a question?
Yeah, the question is a market approach, great, but comparing apples and pears, I think that's not right. So is that really a market approach? And the other thing is, what is the analysis of the Lib Dem coalition, and how will the Conservatives now, because I think the Lib Dems were a good part in that government, will it be now only nuclear, or where will they go?
Those are good and challenging questions. The nuclear question, I guess I should say I can't speak on behalf of the UK government, or indeed on any of the political parties. I think you're right that it's not clear that any private sector, pure market, has ever built nuclear power because the liabilities are so significant that we require the state to take those on. It's clear to me from the UK's experience that given that the contract for difference for the Hinkley Point C project is more than twice as long as any other contract for difference for any other form of power, that there is special treatment. Green Alliance doesn't particularly have a view on whether or not nuclear is a good or bad as such. So all I would say is that, yes, there is it seems clear that we are inventing special mechanisms to enable nuclear to operate within the market. Whether or not that's a good thing, I won't comment on. On the point about your sort of coalition things, I mean, yes, I think the Lib Dems did provide some good impetus to the coalition. The government is, about a month old now in the UK, and I think some of the initial signs have been good. Certainly the ministers that have been appointed are in favour of decarbonisation. The Prime Minister signed a pledge saying that he will stick with carbon budgets. I don't think there's any likelihood that drive will diminish. I guess what I would say is that there's a difference between rhetoric and policy, and where the UK conversation has become most problematic is at the level of rhetoric, where there has been uncertainty and there has been, in my view, the myth of shale gas in the UK has loomed very large without much analytical underpinning.
What's going to happen for that? Because shale gas seems to be a relatively popular idea with the current government. At least it's not stopping any of the fracking.
I mean, what fracking is the answer? The UK has talked about shale gas for a while, and if you look at the United States, where fracking is a real deal and has been transformative in the energy system there, if you look at where it occurs, I should declare I'm from California, so I have some experience of the United States, it's in poor places a long way from where anyone lives. And if you look at where the gas resource in the United Kingdom is, There's quite a lot in the home counties where lots of rich people live, and there's quite a lot in, and this is a direct quote from a member of the House of Lords, the grim and desolate north. Unfortunately, the people who live in the grim and desolate north don't think it's grim or desolate or particularly want fracking. There is a real challenge in developing what is a land-extensive energy technology in a place that is as densely populated as the UK. And I sort of surprisingly agree with large fossil fuel companies who are saying it's very unlikely on both development prospect and on cost grounds that the UK will develop a large amount of shale gas because it doesn't look like it will be profitable to do so.
Well, let's hope the government hears that point of view.
I will just comment very shortly on your reflection on nuclear and the market. As I said, we have a deregulated market now in the Nordics. North Pole is not perfect, but it's a functional system. If we look at nuclear on deregulated markets, we don't have so many cases. We have Finland. Finland is a very special case when they elaborate on their energy security because of for obvious reasons that I don't have to go into here. I'm sure you understand them. That made it possible for the energy, the power industry and the energy-intensive industry to make a deal. And that happened. And so we have 1,600, I think, megawatt coming in the Nordic system. We don't know if we will go into the Nordic system, but we know that the Finns will have increased capacity. We don't know when it will come. As you know, it is a French supplier. We still wait for it. But it will come, and then it will somehow it will have an impact. Now, the Swedish situation is very different, and many Swedes now look at the UK and this decision on feed-in tariffs, high expensive levels, long periods. Traditionally in Sweden we have worked with certificates which ensures us the least cost solution for the market. That is working well, I must say. So I don't see that type of decision in the Swedish parliament. Now that a private investor on the Swedish market should choose to invest like 80 or 90 or 100 billion Swedish kroner in a nuclear reactor that would start to deliver in 12 or 15 years at the best onto a market that no one has a clue of today what it will look like. I don't see that happen. So that's my answer. And this is not I don't deplore it, and this is nothing that I hope for, or it is just a observation of reality. Okay?
Thank you. I think we have a couple of questions.
Hi, I'm Christoph Gabel. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have 3 questions. The one about public support. So, Dustin, can you tell us why do you think there is such a public support for decarbonation of the economy in the UK? Catharina, can you tell us more about the public supports in Sweden? And public support about the decarbonation of the economy, for example, in the power sector, but not necessarily. And to both of you, how do you think we can improve it in other countries, for example, in France?
I hesitate to say how the French can improve public participation, particularly coming from, yes, an Anglo-Saxon. I feel like giving advice is probably not a wise thing to do. I can say a few things about why the idea of decarbonisation is popular in the UK. I think that the interaction between a moment in 2006, 7 and 8 where there was clearly very high public concern off the back of an elite consensus that this was a problem, got turned into a legal mechanism in the form of the Climate Change Act, and that regular carbon budget process, I think, has kept everyone on track. The other thing is that people see that green is working. You know, we did a bit of work with a large UK retailer, a large survey of their customers to try to figure out what they thought about green issues and why it mattered to them. And I guess the line that came out most clearly was that green is now normal. People across the income spectrum think they just want the green option. They don't particularly want to be presented with the high carbon and the low carbon option and be allowed to choose. They just want choice editing. They'd like a retailer to have whatever the lowest carbon, best food stuff is. They want their electricity system to be decarbonized, and they accept that there is complexity about that, and they would like some element of choice about how that technology is deployed, what that technology is. But I think the idea has now landed that we do need to decarbonize, there are great opportunities from doing so, and that this is kind of the future.
As I said, in Sweden, we have choose to work with the certificate system because it enables the cheapest to get the cheapest solution to the market. This has worked fairly well. When we look at other countries in Sweden, we tend always first to consult our Nordic neighbors. That is natural because especially in the energy sector we have a lot of similar thinking. As you may know, Sweden now since some years have a common certificate market with Norway. That is giving small-scale hydropower to a large extent new investments in Norway, and until now of onshore wind in Sweden. I guess that in the coming years it will hopefully give a little bit of bio-based small-scale bio-based CHP more in Sweden, and maybe also some breakthroughs of solar, but that is so far this is very it's a tough solar. In Sweden we have a lot of technologies for solar, but we have a very small market, unfortunately. Yes, I would say that is the main way that we influence also neighboring countries. Yeah.
Having said I don't want to give advice to the French, I'm not going to, but I'm going to give a lesson from perhaps the perspective that I think we're increasingly coming to in the UK. And it actually arises out of stuff that's happening in both the United States and in Germany. I think the cleverest thing about the German energy transition has been that it has invested people, individuals, in the energy system transition. So now individuals, whether it's through ownership of a solar panel or a community wind, have a stake in the change and want to see that happen. One of the most surprising things I've seen in the United States is the Tea Party, not normally considered to be a progressive expression of politics in the United States. There's this brilliant website I found which is basically saying, don't let big government take solar away from us. And the whole mechanism is we as rugged individualist Americans want solar panels on our roof, and we don't want the state-run utilities to tell us we can't have our energy. There's something about this idea of engagement, and more than in simple engagement in the sense of it's your stuff but we talk about it, but ownership and integration into the energy system, which has proved very popular, and that may be interesting for France.
Thank you for this insight. I think, did Mathieu have a question? Or sorry, Jean-Marc.
Actually, I have 5 questions now.
Can I just, one precision, I don't think Dustin, Jean-Marc is the Shift's president. And I think Catharina, you know Jean-Marc. Jean-Marc is the Shift's president.
No, actually, first I wanted to thank you to have made the trip for us, because for the audience, ils sont venus rien que pour nous. I have 5 questions. The first one is for you. Don't you think that putting the remaining oil and the wind in Scotland is creating some kind of imbalance within UK? I got a second question which also deals with geopolitics, which is there anything regarding energy in the referendum to come regarding the fact that UK remains or not within the EU? The third question is, are there any academic debates in UK regarding what it means to go over 30% of variable electricity sources? Because the first 30%, as you rightfully pointed, are the easy part. Then you have system costs. And so I would like to know whether, because in France this debate is not very serious. Then I have a question regarding both countries. You have the reputation seen from France to be more pragmatic than we are, or than the Germans are. And I would like to know whether you manage to have debates on balancing risks, whether on this is bad and this is good, no matter how you do it, how much you have. I mean, for example, nuclear is bad, no matter how much you have, it's just bad. Solar is good, no matter how much you have, it's just good. And actually, you never balance risks, depending on how much you have of this or that, and whether you keep or you pull out of this or that. So that was my fourth question. And then I have a last question regarding oil for UK, because the question has been asked for Sweden. What is the plan regarding transportation and oil in the low carbon future of UK?
All easy questions, thank you very much. I think I'll start with the constitutional question about Scotland, because that's, of course, the most straightforward and least contentious, followed closely by the EU question. Is there an imbalance? There is a medium-term risk that if Scotland becomes a dominant energy generator in the UK, that there's, particularly where there is some element of public support, financial support, that this becomes a contentious issue. Where it is likely to become an issue in the short run is to do with onshore wind farms. So to be blunt, I guess, the constituency that doesn't like onshore wind farms is predominantly in England. And there are a lot of Scottish people who are making good money off of onshore wind. The Scottish government is very much in favour of onshore wind, but the UK government deals with energy policy. So there's currently a little fight brewing over whether or not we continue to have wind farms onshore in Scotland, and whether or not that's acceptable for the UK. If that happens, then it will be a bunch of English people paying for Scottish wind farms, benefiting, of course, from the lower prices that those wind farms produce, but potentially thinking, why is my money going to them? It's not a very good sort of politics, in my view. This is a personal opinion, and I hope that we'll resolve it in a sensible, low-carbon kind of way. On to energy in the EU. I don't think it's the most salient issue for the UK's debate over the EU, which is more about conceptions of sovereignty and concerns about overreach. What I would say is that the UK has been remarkably successful in its climate diplomacy, and that is built on European and being a part of Europe. The UK is, an important country, but not the most important country in the world. And I think that when it comes to its negotiating power, whether or not that's in the climate conference at the end of the year here, or whether it's in any continued climate negotiations, the UK, being a strong part of Europe, puts it in a much better place to help shape the agenda. And I know that a world in which climate diplomacy is dominated by the big powers of the world, whether China and the United States, would be a world in which the UK had less influence and would do less well. So I think that's all I'll say about the energy and EU question. The academic debate about going beyond 30%, I think, is stagnant, and that's because we can, in principle, get, well, it's a 2020s problem, and right now we're trying to get to 2020, I think is the way I'd characterize it. It very much depends on your view of what carbon capture and storage can do. So either you can balance variable renewables with flexible carbon capture and storage, or you can pursue a lot of interconnection, and then it becomes, well, your cousins, the Norwegians' problem, or at least we'd quite like it if it became the Norwegians' problem so that they can swish water up and down hills for us while our wind turbines turn or don't. And it also becomes a question of how do we activate the demand side. There's quite a lot of potential, it looks like, for changing demand patterns to reflect variable renewables, and there is some academic research starting there. Balancing risks, it's quite a complicated question. I guess what I'd say is there is one power source which is clearly a bad thing, and that is unabated coal-fired power. It's fairly clear we can't have very much of it. Certainly in the UK, we're in the process of phasing it out, and we need to do so quickly. France has a tiny little smidgen of unabated coal still running on the system, 2 gigawatts, something like that. It'd be lovely if you guys could also switch all of that off, or at least promise to do so. I'm sure that if you did so, that would build pressure in the UK for us to do so. Other types of balancing risk, I think, again, because we have the proposal anyway in the UK is for a balanced transition with some component of nuclear, some component of CCS, and some components of renewables. We haven't entered into the discussion about whether it's all or nothing. I don't think anyone is proposing that particularly. Finally, on transport, for the moment we are aiming to meet our 2020 targets using biofuels. There are serious questions about the sustainability of those biofuels, and I think a lot of environmentalists have rowed back from biofuels as a solution. Nonetheless, that's the short-term aim. In the medium term, I think we're hopeful that the likes of Tesla and likes of Mitsubishi, which have a plant building electric cars in the UK, will provide a big slug of low-carbon transport via battery electric vehicles.
Thank you.
So I will take the 2 last questions in one answer. In Sweden, ever since the referendum that I mentioned, we have had a very boring debate on energy, because either you wanted to build 12 new reactors in the next decade, or you wanted to close them all down as soon as possible. So this has been a not very intelligent or constructive debate, and a very monolithic debate. I would say that I see signs now that this is changing, precisely because of the fact that for the first time people start to see that shutdown of 1 or 2 reactors may become reality. This is, I would say, mostly due to the post-Fukushima rules. Independent core cooling is very expensive, and some of the oldest reactors will not be able to cope with that economically. So this is opening up now for a better discussion. There is a debate on really high penetration levels of VRE, what will happen. And of course, there is a very strong lobby in Sweden for more transmission lines, obviously. That goes without saying. I think that is a good solution, because that will help also cut costs for the transition in continental Europe. And of course, then there are people in Sweden, in the Nordics, they say, why should we build those transmission lines and expanding renewable energy without being able to benefit from the subsidies in the receiving countries. But we will not only export renewable energy, we will also export flexibility, regulating power, of course. Then there is a growing consciousness of the potential of demand-side response. That is also very new. our think tank is engaging in trying to visualize and make that visible pedagogically. I'm personally engaged in a project at the International Energy Agency to work with this for the coming years, so there is a lot of new things happening now, giving incentives to new discussions, and the system risks are. I think the Nord Pool and the Nordic scenario is a good way is a good background for getting a more sensible discussion on this. So I have good hope.
Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions.
When the EMR has been proposed a few months ago, there was the idea, of course, to decarbonize the energy mix, but also to keep the bills as low as possible. And the idea was I would like to say that it is easy for economists to demonstrate that the model is economically viable if you take a high assumption for fossil fuel price, and then you compare it to the cost of decarbonized solutions. Today, gas prices have fallen. Is it so easy to demonstrate that, given the increase that we have seen of the bills as announced by the Big Six, that gas price will increase, electricity price have increased. So how can you do that? And I think there is some question. If we look at the debate, if I'm correct, the Labour Party has announced that they will freeze the price of electricity if they are elected, and today the Conservative Party seems to give more trust on the market force than on the rest. So I think the market is working in Sweden, apparently, because you have the chance to have natural resource, you have hydro, you have not the North Sea anymore in the UK. So what is the plan to maintain the bills at a low level?
Lots of questions in there. On the Labour Party versus Conservative Party, I think the Labour Party is moving away from the price freeze after they lost the election. I suppose you would expect that. Yes, the fall in fossil fuel prices is creating a challenge for the UK's energy transition. You can view that in one of two ways. It requires a greater amount of money to bring low carbon technologies to a competitive level as a gas-fired generator, but it also reduces the total cost of decarbonisation because the vast bulk of most people's bills is still down to the gas price. So you can see it in one of two ways. It increases support costs, but total bill may come down. The question of the politics of low cost, I guess I'd say two things. The first is that the public opinion research that we've seen and been engaged with, and this is very high quality academic research, suggests that people want an affordable energy transition, not necessarily the cheapest possible energy transition. And that's partially because when you talk to individuals, they actually have sophisticated ways of engaging in the energy system. The media narrative tends to simplify it to, we want cheap, we want it now, that kind of thing. But the reality is people recognize that there's a cost associated with some choice. So the cheapest way of decarbonizing today would be just to build 30 or 40 gigawatts of onshore wind in the UK. I think that would be very unpopular if that were tried. And I've certainly spoken to a number of people who've said, I would rather pay more in my electricity bill to have an offshore wind farm. There are people who would say, I would rather pay more to have a nuclear power station. There are people who would say, I would quite like to have carbon capture. Well, there are relatively few people who would say, I'd quite like to have carbon capture and storage. It's not a technology that has a lot of public awareness or indeed public support. But the key thing, and it's very clear from all of the analysis that will keep bills down in the UK, is reduced energy demand. And that's an area where this government has a real challenge on its hands.
We'll take, no, that's it. Mathieu didn't have one. I don't know, he had a microphone in his hand, that's why. Bon. We'll take it, just make it short, please.
I thought this was game over, is it? Well, no, I just wanted to thank you once more and say once more the reason why we wanted to set this roundtable, because these days one may have the impression that Germany is the only example that we can focus on when we talk about energy transition, and you showed us otherwise. My question is about two specificities of both the Swedish and the British energy mix. One is about Sweden. How did you manage to make the use in residential of heat pumps so big? And the other one is about the Britons. I think this solution is more beyond the horizon, but it's a solution that I personally like a lot. It's tidal turbines. I hear that there's a huge potential both in the British Channel and also in Scotland, and I wanted to have an update on this.
Tidal power, yes. There is a huge resource. Whether or not we can deploy anything that will capture that resource is a big question. The Pentland Firth between Orkney and the north of Scotland has got some of the biggest tides in Europe. If we could stick some turbines in the water there, then it would be a great source of highly predictable, although variable, renewable energy. There are a few companies that are looking at it. The trouble is, because there's so much power in the water, it tends to rip machines apart, and we're still working on how to fix that problem. But we have the help of our German friends in the form of Siemens, who bought marine current turbines, which are currently working on it. So if there are any engineers in the world that can handle it, I'm sure the Germans can. The Severn Estuary, which is the other major tidal project, that's currently being discussed. Lots of things have been discussed in the Severn for the last 40 years. We don't know whether or not it will happen. It's another major challenge. I think it comes on to the question of, it's similar to the question about nuclear. The asset you would build in the Severn would last on the order of 120 years. And because it's such a long lifetime asset, your assumption on the discount rate for that makes the difference between cheap electricity and expensive electricity. And as far as I can tell, no one can give me a reasonable discount rate or a reason why a particular discount rate for that kind of project should be chosen. So I suspect that it will come down not so much to economics, but to political will as to whether or not that project gets built.
You had a question on heat pumps. I'm not sure that I understood what your question was. Geothermal. Okay. Yes, this is a growing market in Sweden, and it is also in the last decade its importance has been growing also in the district heating sector. Heat pumps in general, but geothermal is, we have a manufacturing company which is growing worldwide, very, very well known. And this has started basically with a growing market in Sweden. I can just give an example. We have a house in the archipelago, and when we renovated our house and extended it, this is now a couple of years ago, it was not allowed, it was prohibited to continue with electricity-based heating. So you had to apply specifically for that So, and there was a big incentive for choosing geothermal. So we actually did that, in spite of the fact that it became very expensive because we had to replace all the infrastructure also in the house. But having done that now, I can understand why it is gaining ground, because it's a comfort in the heat which is very exceptional, and so I think yes, it's growing. Yeah.
Thank you very much to the two of you for coming to Paris, especially for this session. I think there's a lot that we've learned. There's still a lot of questions we would have wanted to ask you, but I guess a very short conclusion would just be that there's very strong political will in both of your countries, which have led to very strong climate policy. I mean, we barely talked about the €120 carbon tax in Sweden, but it's an extremely strong measure to have. And we would have loved to ask you how you think we could replicate that elsewhere, but we'll do that another day. And Dustin, I think that one of the things that kind of boggles me is how Cameron is coming out as a strong political figure in the arena of climate change against all odds. So lessons to be learned. Thank you very much for coming here.